Welcome to the second of two talks today by our guest Ariadna Perich. She just finished the first one at 1:15, 1:20. I'm going to keep my introduction. Ariadna comes to us most directly from atETSAB, Barcelona's storied architecture school. She exemplifies the architectural discourse and training that 20th century Iberian architecture is known for. Its compact with society to build responsibly and to build well. Her talk today focuses on Catalonia, a very small country in Spain, just about 7 million people, that has consistently produced remarkable architects and architecture. Gaudí, Pujol, Claudette, Bofill, Moneo, today just a few of those who have studied and taught at atETSAB. And there are 9 very lucky seniors headed to Barcelona to spend some time in atETSAB next fall. Asking Ariadna to present an overview of this ongoing tradition was to set her an impossible challenge. Ariadna has chosen to frame her introduction by looking at the way Catalan architects, or the Catalan AIA, or the Catalan Cultural Institute Ramon have curated Catalan architecture for presentation at the last 2 Venice Biennales, 2014 and 2012. Please join me in giving Ariadna a very warm hand.
Hi. Well, hello everybody. First of all, I would like to thank Mark Cotton for the invitation, also Ellen Durham-Jones and Richard Danaher. For me, it has been a pleasure to be here for my first time, even though this is my second lecture in a row, and maybe my discourse fields will suffer from a bit of the tiredness. I will try to come across of the ideas I wanted to show you. As Sabir said, it was for me a challenge to frame this lecture. When somebody asks you to talk about what's Catalan architecture, of course the question it's big, and the answers are plenty. So for the time I had, and I thought that an interesting way of approaching to give a possible answer, it would be for me to critically observe and revise the last 2 pavilions, Catalan national pavilions that they have been presented in one of the most renowned international architectural exhibitions in the world that takes place in Venice every 2 years. That, I guess, would give me at least we could say I could argue, or I could at least try to come across of how architects before me they have answered the same question. What is Catalan architecture and how can we present it to the world? I'll start with this image of Venice. As you may know, Venice is not a casualty that it's a city that holds one exhibition like the International Exhibition of Architecture. It's not a casualty neither that it holds also the very important art exhibitions every 2 years too. I know the city very well. I was there for 5 weeks when I was a student, alongside Giancarlo Di Carlo and Peter Smithson for this not anymore working workshop called Eloud. It's a city like it's quoted here on top of the slide. It's a city that it's very literary in a way that somehow everything that is there, even though it seems very plausible, it's all a bit fake. It's a city then that I think it has some kind of, it's not a casualty that it's an attraction for architects, not only for its beauty, that it's obviously there, but also for another condition that it's, like Giulia Foscari said in this recent published book, Elements of Venice, it's a city that it's a metamorphous entity. It's a city that it's not beauty by itself. It's not perfect. It's not original. It has been transformed during the years. It has had a constant state of development, and that, I think, is what it makes it the best scenario for this kind of events. Events that somehow pretend to show every 2 years the state of the question of and the profession of architecture around the world. So in Venice we start. The exhibition, as you may know, the international exhibition takes place in the Giardini. This is just a drawing, also extract from the book from Giulio Foscari. It also has the main exhibitions are made. The national pavilions are in the Giardini, but also the Arsenale, which is here on the left. It was reconverted for exhibition space. Also alongside with the first architectural exhibition. And the Catalan pavilions, they decided, Catalan government decided to be present in this event. They are not, of course, they cannot be, because we don't have any national pavilion in the Giardini, there is the Spanish one. They are part of the Eventi Collaterale, that is just a certain other nationalities and other events take place alongside the city, and maybe you don't see, but it's the Catalan pavilion has been held in the same space for the last two exhibitions, and it's quite close to the Arsenal. It's actually in this island on top where there's this church plan in between the Giardini and the Arsenale. I kind of had the necessity, in order to frame the context, not only of the Catalan pavilions, but also of the exhibition, because I think it's interesting to know this. The first exhibition, the first architectural exhibition that took place in Venice, it called The Presence of the Past. His curator was Paolo Portoghesi, and it took place in the 1980s. It's interesting to know, this is an image, this on the left hand you can see an article from Jan Jakes arguing about the idea of postmodernism that was presented in that time, and on the right you see the famous installation of Hans Hollein in that place. What took one of the most renowned installations from the time, because that was a breaking point. Not only was the first architectural exhibition that took place in the Biennale of Venice, but it was also interesting the way it opened up the new space of the Arsenale. And what Paolo Portoghesi asked 20 architects, it was to kind of build what it was called the Strada Nuovissima. 20 architects where they were given a space to build a facade and to recreate a kind of a new street, made by these 20 individual facades that every architect or every firm had to do a comment about it. So it was it implied a design. So and that's, for example, it's interesting to take up this, how you can see that Hans Hollein was, for me, one of the most suggestive interventions, where he kind of used the existing columns of the Arsenale and somehow recreate this columnate of different versions of what we could understand a common could be a long time. Very interesting, theoretically speaking. Of course, it was not a real facade. He just constructed a theory about that. What was also important from these 20 architects invited by Portoghesi, two for me they stand up and they are quite interesting to quote now, especially because one of it is Rem Koolhaas on the right. He was there together with Elias Angelis and invited to do one proposal for one of the facades, and he was now the latest curator for the latest exhibition. So somehow, as you will see, Rem Koolhaas was present in a sense, in the first architectural biennale, was present also in the last two architectural biennales where the Catalan pavilions also took place. These for me were very good comparing to the others. Now that we can see these interventions in perspective, were really, really good comments about, and they were really different. They stand up from being very different from the rest of the intervention. Somehow the other ones had they share this common language of what's so-called at the time postmodernism. But in my opinion, Frank Gehry and Rem Koolhaas stand up for doing something different on the time. Frank Gehry with this rude and crude naked facade, somehow showing the structure of what it could be, a facade that it's not there yet, like an unfinished proposal of some, but at the same time very tectonic and expressive. And Rem Koolhaas, by using this kind of mesh, this volatile and semi-transparent and undefined somehow facade to present his like this, like we were in the entrance of a bar called Oma. A bit poppy. Sorry. So, giving this introduction about what was the first exhibition, the Catalan pavilions, they took place in the framework of the two last. The first one was Common Ground. The title of the exhibition was Common Ground, and it was directed by Chipperfield. He somehow, as we will see, I can say that they started together with the last one, with Fundamentals, with Rem Koolhaas. They started, for me, achieved in the way that the Biennales were framed in the last periods. Maybe we could say that they were somehow a reaction of the current situation, economically speaking, especially, and how the profession somehow it's facing at a moment where maybe we need to revise or we need to rethink about what are we putting our attention in. And so both exhibitions try to look away from the individual author representation of architects, or the start architecture, we could say, and they try to go to using these titles, using these words about things we have in common, things that are fundamental, that are essential, like in a way, like a introspective view of what architecture is, and somehow expecting that maybe it's the moment for it. It's a moment to stop and to rethink, to look backwards, and then think, is that what we shared in common, or which are the foundations of where we can move forward in the future? By just explaining these three quotes, this is just the main, somehow the top phrases that the curators they use. Paolo Portoghesi, he said, the exhibition in the 1980s is with architecture, not about architecture, by building the Strada Nuovissima. David Chipperfield said, the exhibition needs to demonstrate the importance of influence and of the continuity of cultural endeavor, to illustrate common and shared ideas that form the basis of an architectural culture. So let's look each other, even though we come from different backgrounds, what we have in common in order to start the debate from now on. And then Rem Koolhaas last year said, okay, we do architecture, but not architects. That was not true. An umbrella theme for the national pavilions, from national to universal. So he framed a theme from the national pavilions, and normally they had they were free to do what they wanted. He kind of suggests an idea that they should have a look at the last 100 years of their own architecture, national architectures, and try to make a comment about it. And then the Arsenale that he turned, that was one of his best works. He turned the Arsenale in a performance space, and he was the first one that instead of 3 months, the Architectural Biennale lasted last year from 6 months, because he embraced the other biennales, like the dancing and the theater biennale. So in that way, he was very, very clever. That just 3 images of the 3 different times, just to illustrate. So why and who orders and decides to go to Venice in Catalonia? The institute, like Xavier said, the Institute of Ramon Llull, it's a consortium between the Catalan government and the city of Barcelona, and they are just their aim to promote and defend Catalan language and culture. Normally, they were already supporting the art biennales in Venice, and then in 2012 they decided to open up a competition for an architectural pavilion, national pavilion, that would go in the Biennale of Common Ground. It was an open competition to all the architects or teams that they wanted to present, and they gave this framework. Somehow they say it has to be, it has to reflect the contemporary architecture, so the works have to be made and designed the recent years. It has to be somehow, they have to be able, the curators have to be able to do a critical reflection or a suggestive dissertation. It has to be original, it has to be opportune in the context of the current crisis. They also say the exhibition should include a maximum of 8 authors, not works, and the selected architectural works can either be public or private. As you will see later, in 2014, the conceptual framework that they also put up, it's slightly less precise. They was more open to interpretation, and they again insist we are in this kind of the state of change of paradigm, to see how Catalan contemporary architecture is reacting to that, and to understand that maybe Catalans can take the lead, or how its architecture can contribute to this international architectural discourse that the current situation is giving. So they kind of give this open 2 frames, and they open a competition, and that's what happened. The first competition in 2012, I think there was more than 50 entries. There was finally these 5 finalists. The last one, Bugados, or Architectural Rowers, was the winner one. In 2014 I think there was less entries than the previous, and they defined 3 finalists, which grafting architecture was the winner at the end. For the presentation, I thought, at the beginning I thought maybe I could just talk about the winners, because I personally visited 2 pavilions, and I could give a comment about it. But then I thought, why maybe just in order to get a wider view and also a more realistic view of how architects in Catalonia, they understand or they think that architecture is, Catalan architecture is, and how it has to be presented in this kind of event. I thought I should go for the finalists. I should go for the ones that they didn't win, because maybe they also point out at certain aspects that I personally felt that they were missing in the winners. So in order to get a wider view and to be able to compare between them, I asked personally, because this material is not available. It's the Institut Ramon Llull, they own the proposal, so I personally asked several of the members of the Dewey finalists that I personally know them, and they generously gave me the material. So what I'm going to show today, it's not only the winners, but it's also some never seen material from the proposals that they were discarded, which I think they complement, and maybe it gives you more space to compare and have another view of how Catalan architecture can be described. So we start with the winner. So we get the winner from 2012. The winner from 2012 was, of course, it was a team made by 2 Catalan architects, Jordi Badia and Félix Arranz. This competition, when you present, you have to present a proposal for the pavilion itself, like a design for the exhibition. You have to present also a theoretical approach. And it also goes along with a design and all the branding around. It has to be present in online, so you need to have a website. You need to have also a catalog published. So it's a whole thing, like a full package of how to present this into this kind of a fair that is this exhibition in Venice. And they choose Bugados, which in English it's architectural, it's rowers, as the title for the exhibition. Of course, it's very important, no? When somebody, like, I guess everybody have this moment, no? Like, imagine when you try to write you write a novel and you have to put a title, or when you do an article. I always find it very difficult to synthesize in one word what the article is. Mostly impossible. But what you really know is, like, it has to suggest something, and it has to imply, it has to have a lot of, for me, a lot of significance within it. And I have to say that the two Biennales, they were good on that. And because rowers, the metaphor of using rowers as a title, when we apply this to architecture, everybody can already imagine what it can be, and it really works to use this metaphor for, I think, explaining the angle, the point of view that they wanted to do to make into the Catalan architectural description. They use not only rowers, but they use the rowers came from this phrase from Jorge Oteiza, which, if you don't know, is was a very unique and interesting Basque artist that was born in 1908 and died in 2003. He was a very polemic artist, but architects in Spain, at least, we really look at him for his sculptural work. I encourage you to look at him. And he said this quote, he said, "He who forks ahead, creating something new, does so like a rower, moving forward but back paddling, looking behind him towards what exists, so as to be able to reinvent its underpinnings." This is interesting because the curators of the 2012 exhibition say Catalan architecture, or this new generation of architects, because I will tell you later, they choose young architects that have been built in the last 5 years, some buildings. They are like rowers, they say. They are architects that with its architecture, they move forward, but looking backwards. So that implies a sense of tradition in itself, and it implies also a sense of a consciousness of being building something that is part of a long trajectory of building already in your country. So they also say, okay, Catalan architecture will be described as architectural rowers. These architectural rowers they say it's a movement that it can be seen in this new generation of architects. They say, okay, the two curators, they decided to take 9 works from young architects, Catalan architects all, and that architectures that they thought that they had something in common, architectures that they somehow, by putting them together, try to create this kind of movement, no? But it's a reinvention, no? They were the first ones that they put a name on this, and they decided suddenly that there was this movement, no? That several architects in different places, in different types of commission, they were doing something similar, no? Or they have common sharing characteristics. They say that these architects, they seek to navigate the turbulent waters of the present to find their path towards the future, but all the while retain a complicit regard for the past, this rower attitude. Rowers also, they say these architectures, these 9 architectures are architectures for living, but they are architectures that, they are sober. They use very simple materials, but at the same time with a tremendous technical and intellectual sophistication, which is true. You will see later. So the architecture that seeks to be above its creators, architecture that doesn't want to put architects that doesn't want to put their name in front of it, but instead to be back to the society and with this social and ethical component. Architecture that seeks to return to addressing social contingencies, sustainability, as the only path to survival and also the economical of means from an ethical, technical, and intellectual standpoint. All these kind of phrases that they try to express, this movement. These are the two curators, Jordi Badia and Felix Hernández on the right. They define that the exhibition somehow, they define these 5 points, points that they say that they express, like I said, these share characteristics between these works, and by definition, if they choose these works as the examples of what Catalan architecture is at that time in this context, in this current situation, that's the way they try to explain. So for them, Catalan architecture, it's also represented by these buildings in the Rowell's exhibition. It's an architecture that has, it's intrinsically tied to their locations. An architecture that they say there is no meaning, like without, if you take out the architecture from the site, this suddenly becomes insignificant. So they are very attached to the place with a sense of memory. Architecture that, like they say, they have this ethics and proximity, that they have work together with inhabitants, with this close relationship between the architects, the site, and the necessities of the inhabitants. The use of these permeable materials, this is interesting, like I said before. Materials that they say, all these buildings that they choose, they say they have these, they call permeable materials that somehow they are present a lot in the sites. They are already existing materials that the architects, by the close look at the surroundings, they just decided to use them, but to use them in a different ways. That leads to these kind of architectures that they are very, we could say, experimental, that they could see, like they say, they could be seen as manifestos by itself, because they take the existing conditions, but at the same time they try to reconsider their capacities, and in order to create something new that it's at the same time, like it's with a strong essence of tradition. Works that are they don't come from nothing. Works that they dialogue directly with their past ways of intervening in the place, but also works that somehow they say they could be defined in, they could be seen, ways of working that could be seen in the rest of Catalonia. So these kind of 5 points define what it's for them Catalan architecture. In order to accomplish also a more generical view, the exhibition was somehow divided in three blocks. The first one, these 9 works that from this young generation of architects, and then what they call a section called context. This context was a mosaic of 150 works from other Catalan and Balearic architects. I would say this is a kind of a price that one needs to pay if you don't want to, get somebody angry. I mean, that's what happens. You go to Venice for the first time. Catalan architects are represented there, and you only choose 9 projects and 9 architects. What about all the other? I mean, it's a small community. We are a small country. You can imagine that. They had to do something in order to please everybody, so they decided to reinvent this kind of contextual section of the pavilion where they just they could show with one image 150 other architects and works. So it was, let's say, more fair to the architectural community of Catalonia. The second, the other part of the exhibition was called background. And that's the one that talks more directly about the tradition. So the main works were contemporary, made with the last between 2005 and 2012 maybe. And then they pick up 20 works of previous works created in Catalonia, somehow from architects that are well known, and that they just selected as examples of what it could be, a kind of a genealogy of way of working in Catalan architecture. As a curiosity, as you will see later, the first work that they all pick up, not only the exhibition in 2012, but also the exhibition in 2014, it was an architect and a work, an architect called Jujol, which is an architect that worked alongside Gaudí, and then his work of the Casa Bofarull. So it's very interesting that the two pavilions, these recent pavilions, have started, both of them, like taking as a starting point the same piece and the same architect. That could make us think about it. These 20 works, well, this is just more to get a sense. There is works from Jujol, an architect that, from the 19th century, until recently works from more 2000. Works like La Ricarda. This is a house from Antonio Bonet y Castellana. It's called La Ricarda La Casa Gomis. It's a project that was built in 1953 until 63. I'm just going to go fast. This is just the background that some of the works that they selected, so you get a glance of what I mean by contextual. This is another masterpiece of Coder. This is a Casa Ugalde. It's outside Barcelona. It's also a second residence house, domestic space. If you don't know it, you should. I don't have time to talk about it, but it's a masterpiece, well known in Catalonia. This is what this is a beautiful house. Like I personally like it a lot, in an island in Greece, made by these Catalan architects. Oscar Tusquets and Lluís Clotet, both born in 1941. It's a house in Pantelleria Island, and they also selected as one of the examples of this attitude that Catalan architecture has towards where architectural objects that have a strong presence. They take a lot of things from the site. They do intervene in the site, but but keeping parts of the existing conditions. So they work with what is there, but without a nostalgic way, but always transforming the site, but in a way that you always somehow have a sense of what it was before. So it's architecture that embraces directly certain aspects of the site and turns it into something new without losing the allure or the perfume of what it was there. This could be something that maybe, in my opinion, it's just in one word, in one phrase, what defines what we could say that it's mostly present, an attitude that it's mostly present in Catalan architecture. Another work that was selected as a background, it's this also this work by Mateo. It's a urbanization, a pavement, a reurbanization of this old town in the north of Catalonia. As you can see, by introducing this new material it's not in color, but if it was in color, you could see is red brick and also some natural stone that dialogue directly. It's a modern introduction, but it really dialogues well with the existing textures of the site. This is just a drawing. That's an intervention from late 80s. So just by going through some of the works from these young, talented architects that they selected, not all of them, we don't have time to go through all of them, so I just apologize because you're going to see a lot of material, which I hope it encourages you to look more in detail by yourself. It's all online and it's very reachable, all the material, but just by going fast, I think you will be able to get a sense of these things that they have in common, and why these architectures put together, or you could say that they became a movement. It's an actual tendency. This is a house in Mallorca, made in 2003, 2007, from this architect, Francisco Cifuentes. You can see it's the one on the top, and even though it's a new intervention, he was very, he used, it's not an easy site to build, and he used the material that was available there, but somehow giving it a new appearance, a new meaning. Normally these pieces of thermal clay, they are not meant to be seen. No? Normally it's something that it's material that it seems unfinished, but that's somehow part of the characteristics that they share, all these architectures. They use materials in their essence, and they are presented raw, naked, how they are, and that's what it gives. And this is just a photo before the house is inhabited, and you should see there is photos and a photographer that went afterwards, and how this is just architecture expecting to be inhabited, and you don't need nothing else for it. And somehow the language or the style, it just comes directly from these previous decisions of using these materials that they are available on the site. Imagine, this is a school, that was a small house, and that's a school, but we already can see a similar attitude, how architecture that not only shapes itself according to to take a good relationship with the site, but also connecting in a very direct, with this materiality that it comes directly from the essence of each material. But of course there is a strong sense of composition in this architecture. This architecture, even though it works with materials that they are maybe vulgar or they are not rich in its value, architects, they use their inner characteristics in a very rich way. So it's about how you manipulate them and how you present themselves and how you somehow twist the logical of their functionality in order to in a very, very precise and controlled composition and aesthetics to create these architectures that they are somehow, they have to be available and close to people. Again, these interiors with this simple wood, one of the cheapest wood, but the way where architects decide to put this wood and where they decide to stop one material and start another, it's what it's more, and all this sense of composition, it's what it stands in front of somehow the prices or the cost of the architecture itself. So it's an architecture rich in methodology, rich also in somehow in design methodology. This is also a house that has been very awarded. It's a house in Girona. It's interesting because they own this house in the old town with its quite a big plot, and then they had to, when they were doing, they planned the restoration and the enlargement of the house. They decided that they start finding all these tiles in certain areas of the pre-existing house, and they just collect everything. They number. I remember they were very obsessed about it, and in order to maintain and reuse these materials in other places of the house. So it's this kind of giving them a new life. You for sure, architecture transforms the reality. For sure, the house, it was there, it doesn't exist anymore. But in a sense, something is still there. It's relocated. The pieces are in a new place, but they have a new meaning. But they are the same pieces that they were before, and that architects, they trust that means something. That adds something to the place with respect from the past, because it's an approach to a restoration that is somehow very with a lot of respect for what it was there, and knowing that you are doing an intervention that will eventually continue this line of in the life of this building. So you, with respect, transform it, but also generate this a reality that will later be transformed for sure, and there is no pain on that. This is a very beautiful drawing they did, where you can see lower left the big this new intervention. They also use solar protections that are old ways of. There is not a lot of sophistication in this building. The sophistication maybe is in the way they carefully relocate all the pieces that were before there. And then just to finish this previous selection, this is also a very interesting extension project. No? You can see on the left the original school. This is an extension for a school made in Parma by these SMS architects. Beautifully, even maybe like you could say we are in front of quite of a Baroque facade, in my opinion. Materials are very, very simple, and they are local. They use the idea of how a facade have this texture and how it can breathe and how. But at the same time, this facade is highly composed. It really looks like a painting, no? So there is a lot of time they spend a lot of time in relocating every piece, besides the value of its pieces. But what it's rich there, it's the way every material is located and how it's composed with each other. No? So these are very common materials, very popular, but they force them to coexist in harmony, but creating a new language and exposing, of course, a new point of view, and putting them in strange situations. Maybe you wouldn't find possible that a facade could look like this. It looks like, it can breathe somehow, no? Just to give the other view, no? That was the winners. The winners, they choose nine architectures and they just establish the connections between them. We could argue if rowers came before or after. No, that's a question always. If you force architectures to be rowers or not, this is something we could talk later. But it's interesting because some of the finalists that they didn't win, it's nice because they will give us another approach that maybe we can compare about it and have a critical observation. The thing, this one, they call it agritecture and archiculture, a view from the ground. It's a proposal from Stefano Cortellaro, Don Salvador, and Inés de Rivera. They were finalists, they didn't win, but I just want to pick up what they did. For them, in 2012, Catalan architecture in the context of the common ground had to be presented in relation of landscape. Imagine landscape, it's a word that didn't appear in the rowers. Rowers was very much focused on the pieces, architectural objects itself, and in their materiality. In this case, they just kind of have another view, and they say, no, look, Catalan architecture, of course, happens in Catalonia. Catalonia has a diverse and very significant different amount of landscapes that have been for years transformed and intervened by architects with their architecture. And they say we can explain Catalan architecture by defining these typologies of landscapes and choosing these architectures that have been, they have really made a difference in these landscapes, and they have been able to transform it and at the same time be created as part of this landscape, because and maybe that's something that they have in common with the Rowers exhibition. Architecture that it doesn't come from, it's not a conceptual proposal that lands it in a place and that it sits there. No, it's the other way around. It's by carefully reading the conditions of the territory that then this architecture, in a natural way, they appear. So they are very attached. You cannot separate these architectural objects from their sites. And that's what they focus on. So it's just another perspective. They start from the landscapes, and then from the landscapes, architectures appear. And it's interesting because they share some of the examples. For example, the house we just saw from in Mallorca, it's also in this proposal for the pavilion. But for me, one of the if you see here, this collection of architectures that they choose to represent for them what is Catalan architecture in relation to the different landscapes that Catalonia has, you don't see rowers here. You cannot establish a direct connection between the buildings, because One of it is just a solar panel. It's not even a building. One intervention is just a solar panel infrastructure that was made in Barcelona forum area to collect electricity and generate electricity. Another one is it's a small house in the island, and another one, it's just a bench along this amazing landscape just to protect people from falling over and also to establish a sitting area to observe the landscape. So it gives us another feeling of what Catalan architecture is. It's not about the way interventions look. It's not about the final materials they use, if they are raw materials or if they are, it's not about the aesthetics, the color. It's about the way they kind of transform the site where they are. It's about how they are able to actively transform a site by maintaining its original characteristics, which is something that, somehow, maybe if you just have this bunch of buildings and you try to make a connection, at the first you wouldn't understand why they are there all together making a group. But when you understand that there is this idea of territorial landscapes before, where they somehow selected different ways, like interventions in the rural areas, interventions in the edge of the territories, interventions in the urban tissues, but they all share something in common, that it's not aesthetic, not visually maybe you cannot appreciate. The second finalist and the final from this 2012 Catalan Pavilion, for me it adds something also very important, and it's maybe the most different one, because even though the conceptual framework from the pavilion, they ask to put 9, a maximum of 8 architectural works. This group it's a research group from my university, led by Xavier Montes, which is an architect and critic from Barcelona. They did this, they proposed something very different from what we have seen. And in my opinion, it just lights something very interesting with it, something that is less intangible, but at the same time, it's architecture itself. It questions what architecture is, not only what Catalan architecture is, but also what can we understand that it's the territory for architecture. And they see that in Catalonia there is also this other movement, there is also these other projects, other types of projects that they are not only works of architecture, but they're also artistic installations and self-constructed works, like they say, these types of projects that they all conform a way of doing things also in our territory. They are existing interventions, they are things that happen, they are contemporary works that maybe they have always been there, maybe, but now because of the crisis or the existing current situation, they are more visible than ever, So they somehow took the other way. They say, okay, Catalan architecture in Venice can be explained by these other architectures, these other, other experiences, other installations that they also interact with the built reality of our cities and our territory. They divide different. Also, they create these different categories. They said, okay, we are going to talk about the anonymous in front of the dominant protagonism of the author. That somehow it links with the common ground of Chipperfield. So they were really dealing with what the director of the Biennale was talking to them. We are going to talk about what we call supermarket architecture. What is a supermarket architecture? And then they say, okay, it's architecture that it's formed by conscious mix of manufactured products. We are going to talk about works that they are works existing, but from another point of view. We're going to talk about works that have something of practical and even eatable. We're going to take the house closer to the street. We're going to see how private space meets public space and what happens in this space in between. We're going to also talk about activities that take place where the space that they take place, it doesn't seem the adequate one. For example, activities that they are in a place that, okay, we never expected that would happen there. That's also architecture. And we're going to talk about works that they also have certain temporality. The idea of temporality is something that the other works, the other finalists, they didn't talk about it, but it's also a reflection of what Catalan architecture is reacting now on what we are doing. We're doing more temporary works than ever. We're doing actions more than ever because there is not enough money to build certain scale of projects, but there is all these other projects happening, more volatile, more ephemeral, but they are also architecture. And of course, we're going to talk about how these architects that reuse these strategies of reusing the already existing materials. So that was something that for me, this proposal, maybe it was a proposal that it's not a casualty that it didn't win, because at the end, a national pavilion paid by the government of Catalonia plus the city of Barcelona, I don't know if they would have been very comfortable by going to Venice explaining how, for example, a group of neighbors, they meet and gather together in the middle of the street eating in a long table, or how what it happens in Barcelona, for example, is that somebody organizes concerts in the balconies, or how there is a whole movement of a neighborhood that they promote and they self-construct and reuse structural buildings that have been left abandoned by the government for so long. All these proactive attitudes that come from lower, not from the citizens. So I wonder if they would be comfortable. I guess not. That's why they didn't win. But for this lecture, I thought for me that was very interesting. Like how a group, you can also explain Catalan architecture like that, by the architecture that is not fixed, that architecture that doesn't have an author, architecture that is temporary, that has been built for a specific moment in time, but with a very, very intense design attitude behind, with a very also a very huge creativity, and they also, that's what I was saying before about the eating architecture, that it happens in without architects. Architecture that confronts and occupies public space, transforming, and breaking the boundaries between private and public, and also dance installation. For example, this, if you don't know Israel Galvan, you should look for him. He's a flamenco dancer, Spanish, that for me he's breaking, he's really changing the perception of what flamenco is. He's somehow getting closer to contemporary dance. Even the last show he did, it is together with a contemporary dancer. But he did this very interesting project, they commissioned him, that it's called La Ciutat Buida, where it's the empty city, where he came into this very generic flat from these blocks outside the city of Barcelona, a flat that you wouldn't have without any specific characteristic. And they record him dancing for more than nearly an hour. He took his time to go from each room to each room, and somehow that dance, his presence in that space, explained what this architecture was about, and what somehow it gives a sense of size, but also a sense of character. And I think it's a video that you should really find out. These other kind of interventions that this group, this research group wanted to present in Venice, as that's what Catalan architecture is also. For example, is this festival called Lilliput. It's for a period of time. There was things happening in the street, for example, as you can see on the top right. That was a girl that she stayed 24 hours doing a normal life in a window in a ground floor open to the street, where normally this would be like an entrance of a normal house, and then she was just doing a normal private life, totally open and so these kind of events, that they provoke, they provoke, and they are also somehow, how to say, uncomfortable, I think, because they tension the limits of private and public, and also the use of what we expect from one space. That's also architecture. Of course, at the time, there is something we should do, which is what the Spanish were doing at the same time that we were being rowers. And so the Spanish were doing something called Spain Lab, Innovation and Investigation in Architecture. The image on the left, it's the Catalan, the exhibition, the Catalan Pavilion, and the image on the right, it's an image of part of the Spanish exhibition. We don't know what it is. Well, I do, but it's like a mushroom. But yeah, so the Spanish they understood common ground as exactly the opposite of what Schipperfield wanted to do. And what they presented, it was very specific individual work of certain architects. So I think if we had to compare, we were maybe a bit more closer of what the Biennale was about than they were. The second part is just for the last part of the lecture. What happens 2 years later? 2 years later, in my opinion, it happens a bit the same, which is not a very, I thought that Koolhaas in the last exhibition really provoked, and he opened a window for experimentation, and it was a moment where if you wanted to be present and you wanted to be, to stand out in the last architectural exhibition, you had to do something different. But Catalan, because at the end we shouldn't forget that this is a political decision, and there is politicians behind it, and maybe they understand our profession in a very classical way, more than architects. We maybe are more advanced than them, but at least I think they still think that to go to Venice and present Catalan architecture, it has to be presenting works of architecture and architects. So it's like a fair. Let's go and sell some Catalan architects around the world and see if they can get some jobs. I think that's a very simple approach to what the pavilion could be. And in my opinion, it's okay if the first time, like, you go there as a rower, it's fine. But maybe the second, you could take more risk, and you could show that our Catalan architects are, they are maybe more like the finalists that didn't win, and we have a big range of spectrum, and especially now when our profession is under threat, we are all of us trying to develop different ways of practicing, and our boundaries of the profession are shifting, are expanding. So it's not anymore clear that we can present ourselves as one architect that builds one piece of work and one building. I think we could do something else. In any case, it was interesting again because grafting architecture, somehow like rowers, it implies a way of, as you can in grafting, what is grafting? Grafting is a process that involves inserting part of a tree with one or more buds into the branch or trunk of another tree, such that a permanent union is established between the two. So grafting implies somebody comes with a new piece of something, puts it in a piece that is already existing, and they all became something new, but they maintain parts of what they were before. That's exactly what rowers was a bit. We look forward, but always having looking backwards what was before. So it's again insisting in this idea of we innovate with tradition. Tradition is innovation. We can search. We have sharing attitudes that come from a long time ago, and they are present in the way we build today. So grafting architecture is that, it just transmits this idea of this kind of new, like the curator Josep Torrent said, it's a new organism that combines the strong points of its original components and is more vigorous than either of them on their own, an idea of renewal and growth. So the second curator, the winner of the second pavilion, also insist in that we make architecture by and very much understanding the essential and the best qualities of what is in the site and the pre-existing conditions, but we do something totally new with it. In this time, but they introduce also, they wanted to show these architectures because again they selected not 9 but 16 architectures from the last century of Catalan architecture, but they introduced this interactive, they wanted to see how they were now by doing, they put these cameras on it, and so the pavilion had this streaming direct connection with these architectures in Catalonia and show how these were living. They also, how is the life in these architectures. They also did some artistic interventions like this dancing, you can see on the right, just a screenshot of this video, how these architectures are the platform, or they allow activities to happen, and also artistical interventions that redefine their character, and they give an explanation of what could be. Again, the starting point of this of grafting architecture was Jujol. Interesting, but if you have more time one day to look at his work, which he has been undermined for so long because he has been in the shadow of Gaudí. But in Catalan architectural scene, there is a lot of respect for these secondary figures somehow. We try to find more interesting things in them, or we try to have a tendency to think that there is something there that we didn't see and that was kind of occulted by the other figures, and in this case like Gaudí. And it is true that Jujol was very talented, and besides the aesthetics of what you will see, there is a very modern attitude, we could say. He started the Casa Bofarull, which is the project that was the starting point of this exhibition. It's a project that somehow it started in 1913, so it's exactly more or less when Rem Koolhaas said, hey, you have to look from the last 100 years projects, so starting at the same time. And then it took him 20 years to do the project. It was an existing house that he renovated and he kind of grafted, He really transformed it by slowly introducing new elements that they always dialogue with the existing, but at the same time, the final product of this architecture, it has some things that they are still from the past, but it totally adds a new value. For example, there is not a lot of drawings of the existing house, but this is the house. I know you can see, well, this is just, what is this? Why is this special? But it is special for the process that the architect took over in order to create it. He really, for example, this loggia, what you can see, that's an element that he added to the house, and then he painted the back wall of the interior wall of the loggia in this blue, that it's a blue that mimetizes the blue of the skies of this rural area in the south of Catalonia. So that somehow the house, even though it's a massive volume, and by the originally it was a massive volume, with the small windows, he adds this sense of lightness and transparency, and even playing with these colors. With this, creating this illusion that the house somehow it's transparent. We could imagine that the house, the blue sky somehow crosses the mass of the house, creating this sense of Libyan mass. It's a house. He also, it's famous because he also uses pieces of material that he encountered on the site and somehow relocated in the house. In different places to create different landscapes. That, for example, this is just a project that the curator also selected, one of these 19 projects he selected, and maybe if we go through them, you will see some similarities, but maybe not. It's not that strong like it was again in Bugados, in Roas. the connection. No, it's not a tactile connection, but it's an attitude collection. An attitude. This is a restoration of a church in L'Hospitalet, made in beginning of the 80s, and maybe you don't see nothing special of it, but the intervention somehow, it was so delicate. You can see the color elements, the doors, and this when the doors are open, these colors and these shapes appear. And then when the church is in fully working, it seems like nothing happened. It seems like it just has been repainted and that's all. Again, this attitude of how the design, how to restoration of this architecture transforms the reality, but at the same time allows it to keep the essence of the original. Again, another project that they, as you would see, is this collection of architectures. It's not that coherent in itself, but it shows a bit. This is a famous project from Carme Pinós and Enric Miralles, also in the 80s. It's a school. At that time, that's quite of a paradigm in Catalonia of this kind of a Smithsonian attitude of how to use elements. For example, no? Imagine here you see the radiators of the heating, that they became the supports from the benches in the school, or how the materials are also plain, direct, like the concrete blocks at the end, and the use of so it's this new architecture that is inserted in this existing tissue, like with a new language, a new aesthetic language, a new architectural language, but at the same time with a very strong character, but dialoguing and intervening very well with the pre-existing. Another example of, a recent example, it's this is a beautiful project from RCR, these architects that they are based in Olot. It's in Ripoll, and it's the program it's several. It's a theater. It's also a public space, and it's also a bridge. But again, we could say this is a very radical intervention. So is this this response to how Catalan architecture dialogues with the existing sites? Is it? We could say it is a. Could we argue if this is a strong intervention? Is it, it generates a bridge between the existing, or it introduces a new reality? I would say that this is exactly, maybe this project for me represents very much both things. We could say it is a radical project. It is a very, there is no similarities at all with the existing buildings. It's just a new object that somehow sits together, but with a very clear difference from the surroundings. But at the same time, it really understood what this place needed. It generates a new connection. It maintains the public space with, in between these buildings, with renouncing to an idea of building, keeping the homogeneity and the continuity of this facade. So it's like it's a building, but it's not. So I think this it is an example of an architecture that understands the place, but at the same time totally transform it without being, without making the site bleeding somehow. Something that also happens in this latest intervention. This is a metro, the 3 stations of the new metro line in Barcelona, made in 2008 and 11. This architecture, of course, is a response of the situation of not, the budget for these projects have dropped down a lot. The metro still needs to be done. It's a very long infrastructural project that has been taking, it's still ongoing in Barcelona for so many years. So these interventions, they are a response of the conditions of low budget, but at the same time, the architects, they don't, they use these conditions, they use this situation, they use this moment to turn it into a design strategy. So this is very, there is an architect behind this who thought a lot about what needs to be added and what needs to be left alone and left seen. I mean, this nakedness, this rudeness, this somehow brutalism of the existing, of the scarves of this the existing transformation of the site, it's very carefully planned, and the architects really decide that it has to be like that. So I have to say that this is a very, very interesting work, and very well known also in Barcelona. And we will see how maybe on time, if this is a product of a tendency or fashion or a contextual project, or if it's something that it lasts, see how long it lasts, see if this is an idea that can survive through time when the situation and the context change. It's a question that we will have to see in a few years. And one of the projects, also another of the projects that appear in this second pavilion, Catalan pavilion, it's also infrastructural projects. This is a landscape restoration of this landfill in Vegas, outside Barcelona. As you can see, the design strategy was to reconvert this space into the mountain that it was previously, somehow to recreate the nature before, and it's also a very interesting project. The finalists, just to give the last part of the lecture. The second pavilion, of course, I'm just going to show two of the finalists. This group that didn't pass through, what they gave another point of view which was interesting. It's the project was called Inhabit, from Josep Ferrando and Marta Poch, and what they said, okay, Catalan architecture in the context of fundamental exhibition from Vancouver. What is fundamental in architecture? They said housing. Housing is in the base of our profession. Housing is the essence of all architecture. To give a shelter, to give a place where to be and to live. So they said housing can be the laboratory for change of paradigm in architecture. We have to focus on the domestic space and understand that the domestic space it could be an architectonic laboratory. So they proposed that the pavilion would go and would have only the theme of housing, social housing, and the public space along it. And they are not only meant to show housing projects that have already been, but they said we are going to pick up some teams and they are going to do a project. So the pavilion, it's going to be an excuse to design. It's going to be, because somehow this it's also a characteristic that I think Catalan architecture have, and that also in the School of Barcelona especially, we really teach in that way, and we really learn how to build in that way. It's like we do research by design. We test the sites. We understand the sites by designing on them. It's not just a simple, when we go to a place, and in order to understand the site, we don't do just simple data collection of what this area is and how the size of it, but we also, our way of testing this site is by designing, is by giving proposals, throwing proposals through the site. So it's an active design approach to the understanding of the site. So it's interesting to see that some architects for the Biennale, they propose that the pavilion would be the consequence of a design, and architects would just present themselves with a new proposal that is specially made for this pavilion. So they also they divided in several areas where different people and different groups of architects, young from different generations, they would intervene together. And then there was going to be also an international context, like dialogue with other architects outside Catalonia, because for us, and I think it's also, we are not close inside, we are always, our tradition, our architecture, I think it has been influenced by other countries very much. For a period of time, we had a lot of tradition of going to Italy, and we really owe a lot to Italian architecture and Italian theorists. Now, for example, I could say that new generations of architects, they look a lot of, English architecture, Belgium, and Swiss architects. We kind of feel that we share certain attitudes towards design that, we would like to embrace and incorporate in our design. So there was this pavilion also tried to open up like that and establish, links and bridges with architects outside Catalonia that they have similar attitudes. And the other finalists that they were, for me, it's just too interesting to know, to just bring them here, They were a team that they also were finalists in the 2012, so they are really proactive maybe next year, in 2 years, they are the winners, maybe the third time they managed to do it. But it was interesting what they proposed. The first, in the 2012 Biennale, the same team proposed to understand Catalan architecture through its different types of territories. And in this time, they said, okay, Reinsch-Pierce talked about fundamentals and elements, and it makes us think that we could explain Catalan architecture by understanding the different, natural conditions that at the end it needs to redirect or protect. For example, architecture, it's also some architecture or most of the architecture needs to deal with water, needs to collect the water or redirect the water in other ways. So we could frame some different examples from not only from the present but also from the past, just to make these groups of architectural objects that especially deal with the issue of water. And then again, architecture that especially focus on how to protect from the light, or how to reuse the wind, and embrace this as a design strategy, or how architecture they deal or they recreate new topographies, and they are themselves a topography itself, no? Or finally, how architecture that mainly is a structure, architecture that the essence of its spatial reality, it comes from how to deal with the forces, how to fight with gravity, and that's very present. And then it's, for example, you can see on the relic, Gaudí architecture would appear like one of the examples. But also some work from Jujol and or Bonet Castellano. So just to finish, like we did in the first. What's Spain doing? I mean, we were drafting, more or less. Spain was doing, in my opinion, something interesting. They called the pavilion Interior, and that's the two posters from the two pavilions, and they did something very nice. Even though the pavilion somehow again tried to sell or to explain architecture with authors, several authors, recent buildings built in Spain, but they just make an effort. They hire a photographer that would go around and take photos of these different buildings, and these photos would somehow be reproduced in the pavilion in a way that people could feel inside these buildings. And that was, I remember the photographer saying that was a very difficult task, but somehow let's say that they half achieved what they wanted. So when you went inside the Spanish pavilion, you could, for a moment, feel inside these interiors of these new proposals. But just not to close, in my opinion, the last Biennale, it was a success. Like I said before, Reinsch-Pierce pretended to do a Biennale about architecture without architects. But in the other hand, what when I was there, I found is that there was more architects than ever, but they were not present as star architects. What we saw, there was architects from the last century of every national pavilion brought up amazing architectures that were forgotten. All these architectures were made by architects that I didn't even know existed. Every pavilion had a research team behind, with very young architects that are part of universities. So there was more architects than ever. So for me, the phrase about architecture, not architects, somehow it's just a slogan, but it's not. It's actually achieved the other way. I mean, Koolhaas, I think he achieved the other way, more architects than ever. But they were just everywhere, conforming all the perspectives. And then, as this article that I wrote about the Venice Biennale afterwards, one thing that I pointed out, it's like some of the exhibitions, as an exhibition design, were a failure. And that has been very also some critics, they say that the elements of architecture, for example, which is the exhibition curated by Rem Koolhaas itself in the Biennale Giardini, when you went there, you say, okay, what am I looking at? I mean, the exhibition was not really a good exhibition, but for me, what the most successful part of it's the research that was behind. Because it's impossible, and maybe some of you found this or already confronted this, how do you exhibit a research? What we were seeing in Venice, it was somehow the top of the iceberg of something so much bigger, and by definition so much interesting, that if you are not aware of this research behind, you maybe could leave Venice and think, oh, that wasn't that good this year, It looked like, they were, like Rem Koolhaas was selling windows and staircases but at the end of the day, that wasn't true. I mean, what Rem Koolhaas, of course, he's a fetishist, and what he wanted to do is he were looking around for the most rare and eccentric people. He just showed people that they were obsessed with windows and obsessed with ramps and people that dedicate their own life to just one element, So we were there in a kind of a cabinet of curiosities and rarities. I mean, you had to take it like that, because if not, if you just pretend to see an exhibition that tells you, as a good performing exhibition going into a museum, you would not understand what was there. But for me, the book and the production, this is, for example, pictures that people who went to the Biennale, they came back at home, they unpacked the bag and they say, wow. And somebody was saying that the press and the books were in crisis. I mean, the production, the printed production in the last Venice Biennale was amazing. And for me, most of the best things happened in the books. The same in the Spanish Pavilion. The Spanish Pavilion for me, and they were not any, maybe the 20 books were printed, and it was just a big, everybody was a bit anxious about it, because when we were there for the preview, everybody wanted the book, and there was no book. So they had to put it online for free, and there is a PDF, I think you can get it. But for me, the book, it's amazing. They define, it's very nice the way they understand, they just went through the last 100 years of Spanish architecture, also included Catalan and Basque architecture, of course, by its interiors. And they not, it's very nice, because you get this cut, this horizontal section for the last 100 years, just by looking interiors of different architecture. And the book, something that the exhibition didn't have, the book allows, what the curator did, Herreros, he played like a visual essay, he played with the couples. So he made conscious couples of different architecture that by putting them together, you suddenly start establishing relationship and seeing this architecture in a different way. So, for example, in this case, you can see the Rafael Moneo National Museum in Mérida, from the 80s, next to the Alberto Campo Baeza Savings Bank in Granada from the late 90s. Something is there that is different but equal at the same time. Or, for example, this very recent project from Schultichara, Cuadra Salcedo Arquitectos di Cineteca in Madrid from late 2007, next to the library of Miguel Fisac. There is a huge difference of generation architects in between the image on the left and the image on the right, but as you can see, the curator here established a genealogy. There is a dialogue between these two architectures that, of course, comes across afterwards with a big sense of tradition and how, architecture somehow doesn't progress, and some things are always there. Or, in this case, for example, coming back to the RCR architects in Lot, on the left, the beautiful marquee for Las Cols restaurant, made in also late 2000s, and on the right, this shade house from Javier Vallès, María José López Sardá, also in Madrid. It's just, exciting to see how they dialogue together one each other. No? And to the end, also, of course, in Spain, Jujol was present, in this case by these Maniac workshops built in Barcelona in the beginning of the 20th century. And in this case, they compare it with, they put it together with the pavilion of the Spanish Republic in the international exhibition made by José Luis Sert in the late 30s. Of course, this couple of images, they somehow allow us to see the architecture differently than if we were seeing this alone. And maybe we focus, in this case, we may focus in the element of the roof and how the roof waves, and there's this as something that they share in common. That's to finish my lecture. I again put an image that I made in Venice when I was there in 2000, and I just quote this amazing writer, which is Joseph Brodsky, that he, as many others, he was in love with the city, and he made everything he could possibly do to go every year there and spend some time. That was what he was fighting every year, just and saving the money just to go there. And I always like this quote, which I think maybe it's something would happen today here, even though I just talk too much and I show you too many things. But maybe my lecture, it becomes this kind of coherent thought, through the subconscious of yourself, and in the future, allows you to give a better understanding of what Catalan architecture is. So, thanks for your time. I don't know if somebody wants to make any question. Maybe I understand if you don't. It's a lot to process, but I will be willing to answer. No?
Wow.
Okay.
There are lots of questions. But
it's too much information.
No. There's studio to go, and we have to take you away. Is there a thought moving through the subconscious towards the parents?
Slowly, it's moving very slowly.
Okay.
At least it opened up your curiosity for Catalan architecture. Did you know some of the work? Some of them? Or you saw some very new, yeah?
I am so glad that we were able to get this video recorded.
Yeah, so you can write down and look for the names.
No, this is amazing. Everyone has to go back to the studio. That's it. Thank you. But if someone wants to stay while people are shuffling out, please feel free to talk to Ariadna for a few minutes.
Okay, thank you everybody.